dogwood trees,
Yeah.
They eat all kind of things, and we've wondered how to get rid of them. But recently, we've had a lot of hawks who have begun to hunt in our yard. So I think that's probably a good thing.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you have wooded lots, so
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway,
It seems cozy in the back of your place, just real private.
Yeah, it's pretty private back there. We like it, and
I'm sure.
Our back porch is a great place to get away and kind of just relax either in the morning with a cup of coffee or in the evening with something other than coffee. So that's one of our favorite places. We'll give folks another minute or so. It's I've got 7:30, but we'll wait just to make sure everybody has an opportunity to sign on. That way, maybe we'll only have 44 minutes to talk tonight,
Okay.
or 43. little less pressure. I don't know. Well, it's 7:31 now, so we gave everybody an extra minute. So let me say hello to everybody. Again, my name's Harrison McLeod. I'm the rector here at Christ Church in Greenville, South Carolina, and thank you guys for joining the Clergy Klatch. I'm gonna turn it over to Norma Givens, who's a member of our vestry. She's gonna get us started with a prayer and then introduce our topic for the night. So Norma, good to see you.
Thank you, and happy to be with you. Peace of the Lord be with you.
Also with you.
A prayer on page 840 of the Book of Common Prayer for a diversity of races and cultures. Oh God, who created all peoples in your image, we thank you for the wonderful diversity of races and cultures of this world. Enrich our lives by ever-widening circles of fellowship and show us your presence in those who differ most from us until our knowledge of your love is made perfect in our love for all your children through Jesus Christ our Lord. And another prayer, dear God, in a world where I can be anything, help me to be kind. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Norma. I didn't remember that prayer out of the prayer book. It's amazing how rich a resource the prayer book is.
It is. It is. I've had many people who ask me, so why are you in the Episcopal Church? And I said, and so the late Y.T. Walker said, Norma, you cannot beat the Book of Common Prayer. And he was a lieutenant with Martin Luther King. So I knew I was at the right place at the right time in my life. Yes.
Good.
Coming from a Baptist preacher.
Yeah.
Well, this evening, we're going to continue our discussion, starting with chapter 5 through, I think, about 9 or 10. But the chapters go into more details with the work of Bryan Stevenson, and especially with, I guess I want to call Walter, Mr. Macmillan, the main character of his story. He seemed to, a lot has been written about the process, the meeting of the family, the gathering of witnesses, and all of the other activities Mr. Walter has been involved in. And I think by now we know why he's having really a hard time, and they're not going to believe his relatives that he was with them because of the other relationships he has established with people, a lady who's a little different that he should not have. I think that's probably why he's having a real time with this. And additionally, other people are introduced, especially a group of people that we would not expect to be executed. And those are young people, youth, teenagers, innocent, really babies, have been summoned and incarcerated, the young man who stays for 14 years in solitary confinement. His story is magnificent. And Harrison, I want to confess, you always pride yourself being from Alabama. And since we had this book, I thought you may want to be a little ashamed. But sure enough, in reading this, then here comes South Carolina. And I'm thinking, oh my God, we are doing some of the same things as Alabama. How it is ungodly, can I say? So I'll have to retrieve my thoughts and say we are sister states with similar, back then, similar kind of ideals. But he's always, and I said to myself, I said, he should be glad to be in Greenville.
Well, I've lived in a lot of different places. And what I would say is that people are pretty much the same everywhere. And
seemingly so in the South. And so even the questions selected today are sort of generic in nature, in that they don't really relate to just Alabama, but it relates to the Southern region. And we have characters in here that I certainly can speak about. Mrs. Williams in our community, the community I grew up. There has been and there will always be a Mrs. Williams. And so Harrison asked me who was Mrs. Williams. I said, well, I think I am in Greer. In my community, I want to believe that's the position I'm trying to hold and render encouragement and try to do something for my community.
Well, I'd like to hear more about that, but let's before we get to that, let's go to the first question that we had for tonight. And it's interesting how Stevenson will tell stories, sort of intersperse them with the narrative of the story, with Walter's case and his defense or his appeals for Walter's to get his sentence overturned or a new trial or whatever. And so if you look on page 100, we begin to see there one of these, I guess you could call it a digression. Stevenson writes a little bit about W.E.B. Du Bois and a short story out of his book, The Souls of Black Folk. It's a short story called Of the Coming of John. And John's a young man, African-American, who's raised up by his community, sent off to school to become a teacher. And he comes back to that community and he starts a school for young Black kids who were not allowed to go to school. Then on the way home from school one day, John discovers his sister being groped by this judge's son. He hits him with a board, a 2x4, piece of wood or something. And it so enrages the community and the judge that they form a mob, and John gets lynched. And so I'm reading on page 101 now, the second paragraph, if you want to try to follow with me. It says, I read the story. This is Stevenson's first person here. I read the story several times in college because I identified with John as the hope of an entire community. None of my aunts or uncles had graduated from college. Many hadn't graduated from high school. The people in my church always encouraged me and never asked me for anything back, but I felt a debt accumulating. Du Bois understood this dynamic deeply and brought it to life in a way that absolutely fascinated me. I just hoped that my parallel with John wouldn't extend to the getting lynched part. That certainly would be a hope. But I'm asking about what is the debt he felt accumulating? Who does he owe to? What is that about? And
well, you'd have to historically after Emancipation, Reconstruction, life of many were not given opportunities to study, to even finish high school as like. So the hope of most communities is that their children, the parents of the children, will have a better opportunity than they had, that they will not be sharecroppers, they will not be domestic workers, but they will have the opportunity to learn and to grow. And so they invest in uh, the children. And it's not necessarily money, but it's with encouragement, it's with goodwill, it's with whatever resources they have. Uh, there is this sentiment that flourishes even today. I never shall forget when I was on the school board, and my first thing I said to the community, we were having commencement in the auditorium, and you have to have tickets. And I had the board to understand how important high school graduation was to the African American community. It meant upward mobility. So from that, I was able to encourage them. We have commencement still today, they do, in the stadium. And that allowed the Sunday school teachers and the neighbors and all celebrate the graduation from high school. Because, and I'll say this real quick, the college where I worked, we often said that we were graduating first generation college graduates, but really many of them were first from their families to have earned a high school diploma.
Wow.
So education and learning and growth is so important. And I'm so very saddened. John was doing real well. The thing about the story too that just sort of caught me off was that the judge was involved in the lynching. I mean,
Yeah.
the justice, the man at the seat of just that we expect to be just, and his daughter, I'm sure he's concerned about her, but I would not expect a judge to be involved with lynching. And of course, lynching did take place during that time, but Mr. Stevens, and for him to have gone to Harvard, can you believe? That was a young kid on television of the day who was thought to have been challenged, but he wasn't. He worked with a garbage truck with his father. And believe it or not, he was, I hope some of our viewers saw the story on the news, he was accepted to Harvard's law school.
Wow.
So we are still experiencing that kind of success and that kind of joy, because the states never really provided educational opportunities. And the first school I attended was the old Rosenthal School. Wood school with the potbelly stove.
How about that?
Well,
it's certainly, you know, in John's case, the whole community has invested their hope for themselves, their hope for the future, the hope for the children in him. And so he is really a product, it seems to me, of the community. And I think, you know, Bryan begins to feel this debt accumulating. And I think maybe, you know, maybe for the first time in his life, he sort of realizes all the people that have helped him get to where he is. And that he really becomes the incarnation of the hopes, the dreams, the aspirations of the Black community. And he starts to feel that burden a little bit, starts to feel a kinship with John. I think one of the real fallacies we have in the United States, maybe in the world, is sort of this notion that you know, I've kind of pulled myself up by my bootstraps. You know, that I'm independent. I've done this on my own. I've accomplished this. And the truth is, none of us is a self-made person. We all have people to whom we owe a debt. You know, our parents, our grandparents, aunts, uncles, friends, mentors, people that believed in us, people that encouraged us. And so I think we owe a debt because we're part of a community, whether we want to recognize it or not. I think Paul writes about that really eloquently. If we want to look for some theology about all this. In 1 Corinthians, if you look in chapter 12, Paul writes about being members of the body. And he said, for just as the body is one and has many members, and all are members of the body, though we are many or one body, so it is with Christ. All baptized into one body, Jews, Greeks, slave, free, we're all made to drink of one spirit. And so I think it's always important for us to remember, maybe especially as Episcopalians, that we believe in communion, that we're connected to each other, indissolubly linked through our baptism and through the gift of the Book of Common Prayer that you prayed from at the beginning of tonight's time together. All those things bind us together. And so I think we're all mutually indebted to each other. And you know, when we forget that, I think we're not being honest with ourselves. And I think it's to our peril.
Yeah. Well, because of the opportunities that have been different, it was separate, but it was never equal. So much emphasis is placed in our community. I think I shared with you right quick when I went to University of Georgia. And of course, they were looking for faculty, and they invited me to stay there. And I often wonder what would have happened. And so I turned down that opportunity. And I told you, my grandmama said, those white folk like you, I don't know why you're leaving. So I tried to explain to her that, Mama, I didn't think I'd ever do this, but I promised that I'd work at institution at historically Black school that I could help the young people. And so I have my South Carolina State throw behind me. They helped me, and I'm proud to say I have a record of having helped the other young people. And my mother said to me, I was home, I said, oh my God, these kids don't have any role models. And she said, well, y'all all left home. And I thought, well, okay, let's change the subject. But it's real today, as Mr. Stevenson is saying it. It is so very much an integral part of our community.
Yeah.
People need to be encouraged.
Well,
I love it when you know who they are and you work with them. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's really important. I've been looking at that throw behind you. It's got looks like that's the seal of South Carolina State.
Yeah, it's the bulldog. Yeah,
the bulldog.
That's how I went to Georgia. Georgia's bulldog, so I'm a real dog.
I'm not gonna comment on that.
Dooley's Junkyard Dogs. I was there with Vince Dooley.
Well, let me ask you, since we're looking at that symbol there behind you, the bulldog.
Yeah.
You know, the other question I'd love for us to spend a few minutes talking about, and this is maybe difficult. You know, Stevenson is living in Montgomery while he's been living in Montgomery ever since.
Yeah.
And
he's moved to
Montgomery was the early capital of the Confederacy, and lots of Confederate symbols in the community there. And he reflects on that a little bit on page 128. He's talking about walking around in downtown. He talks about his office, and then he talks about the Dexter Avenue Baptist Church, talks about the state capitol. And he writes, it stood at the end of Dexter Avenue in Montgomery, across the street from the historic Dexter Avenue Baptist Church, where Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. had pastored during the Montgomery bus boycott. A block away was the state capitol, adorned with 3 banners: the American flag, the white and red state flag of Alabama, and the battle flag of the Confederacy. There've been a lot in the press here lately about Confederate symbols. That symbol was taken off of the Alabama State Capitol on June 24th, 2015. I know it's been removed from the South Carolina Capitol. but I wonder, from your perspective, would you be willing to reflect a little bit on, what do those symbols mean to you? How do you see them, and what do you think? What do you think their place is in our public spaces?
Well, I cannot say that they've had meaning for me. I know what they mean, and my interpretation probably may be differ from yours or from people who are different from me, in that they remind me of an old South that uh, abused people, abused humanity, and there was really no humanity. And it is history, and I think it has a place. I don't like the fact that it's celebrated and hailed as something great having happened. I remember so well in South Carolina, the flag was over the Capitol Dome, and we marched and even were successful in having many groups not meet in South Carolina because of that. And so they did agree to take it down, only, and I suppose I don't want to claim it to be a smart move, but when they took it down, they placed it on the state ground. And therefore it was front and center, and we could see it. And sadly, it took the lives for people's lives to have been taken to realize what all of this meant. It really was more of a symbol of hate, a symbol of people who have have misunderstandings, don't know the history, and will not acknowledge or recognize. So a lot of things have happened, and names have changed here recently in terms of a celebration, even the football team, the Redskins. But I was so tickled, America reacts to money. So, if it's going to be an economic impact, oh my God, we really can change. But there has to be a place, and we cannot forget the story. And hopefully, because I told somebody, I've said it repeatedly, with Dylan Roof, he was the young man convicted of killing the people at the church in Charleston. I wish so much it had been his grandfather. It frightens me to know that there's a younger generation who's manifesting the same kind of behavior, who has been misguided and misdirected and have the wrong ideals about life and the people and what has happened. So we have to preserve the history, but I don't think we need to celebrate anything that's adverse and that's inhumane.
You were talking about economics, and I think I'm right about this, but the the Mississippi state flag, they've just changed the Mississippi state flag.
Okay.
And I think part of the reason they changed that is the SEC said they wouldn't play football.
Absolutely.
At the University of Mississippi if that flag was flying.
That's right.
And so football and money got that changed pretty quickly.
Absolutely. And I think I said to you in our discussion, it finally dawned on me. I did go to the University of Chicago years later after I finished Georgia. And I was walking across the campus, and I had a hallelujah moment. I thought, oh my God, this is what slavery is about. It's about money. We in my community could never understand why we were not liked, and yet at the same time, there were great relationships we had. And we formed and bonded, but we just could never understand it. Why do they dislike us so much, and why it must be this way? And suddenly the light came on. Oh, money. If you don't have to pay people, surely you make a lot of money.
Yeah.
And that's what slavery really was about. And then they were held against their will. That's the bad part, in being very brutal. But the main objective was to make money, honey.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And there were a few Black people in Charleston who had slaves.
Yeah.
I don't know how he treated them, but
I don't know.
that's true.
But I've wondered about, these memorials or statues to the Confederacy. I've always been fascinated that in Selma, where they marched from Selma to Montgomery to register to vote.
Mm-hmm.
And the route from Selma to Montgomery takes you over the Edmund Pettus Bridge. A lot of famous pictures of the Edmund Pettus Bridge and demonstrators at one end and the state police at the other end. There's been some talk about changing the name of the Edmund Pettus Bridge. And not everybody's in favor of changing the name. Not everybody in the Black community is in favor of changing the name. And the reason they give for that is that Edmund Pettus was a Confederate general. Then he was a U.S. senator. He was also a Grand Dragon of the Ku Klux Klan. And so there are members of the Black community that like the symbolism that they marched from Selma to Montgomery over the Edmund Pettus Bridge because it reminds them of the Old Testament story where the Hebrew people marched from slavery to freedom over the river. And so they crossed the Alabama River on the back of Edmund Pettus. And they kind of like the symbolism that they walked over the Confederacy in order to register to vote. And they're not eager to let that go. So I've always wondered, is there a way to kind of reappropriate some of the meaning of some of these memorials? I mean, is that a stretch? Is that, I just wonder how that would work out. It's an interesting question.
Yeah,
and
it is, and there is a movement, another segment says that we should name it after John Lewis, the congressman.
mm-hmm.
Certainly he was beaten badly that Sunday, and he has credibly served this country for a long time, and now he's ill. I want the story of that Sunday to always be vivid.
Mm-hmm.
And when the Obamas were in, I think they were celebrating the 50th year of that.
Yep.
That was a wonderful woman, a part of that march. She passed shortly after that, but she got to go across that bridge one more time. And I have been across the bridge in Selma. I'm not sure. I love the ideal because even when slaves were escaping, the famous spiritual wade in the water gave the signal that there would be a movement and they would be crossing, because if they could ever get to the river and cross, usually they would be home free, and the dogs could not catch them. That was the most important part. They would always have the hounds with them. And so while running, if you get to the river, get to the water, you're in safe keeping it. Recently, there was a movie of Harriet Tubman, and she was placed in an awkward situation. So she jumped in the river, and they thought that she had drowned it, but she came across and she was out on one side, and she continued to go back and to help people to become free. So I see that, and I'm not sure I would be happy either way. It does bother me that he was a member of the KKK. That in and of itself denotes the hatred, and there's no telling how many people are in that river. I mean, there are numbers of persons who have been killed, and we don't even know who they were.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a very sad commentary to see that.
Well, as we continue on through the book, chapter 8's titled "All God's Children," and we hear the story there of Ian, who's one of these young kids that's been convicted of a crime and sentenced to death, spends many years in solitary confinement. And finally, Bryan is able to send a photographer to the prison to get him photographed.
Mm-hmm.
For 1 hour, he's able to get out. And Ian writes to Stevenson and asks him if Bryan would send Ian as many copies of the photograph as $1 will buy him. He said it was just, as Ian reflects on the experience, he talks about how meaningful it was, and
Mm-hmm.
He's so taken with the photographs.
Yes.
He may never have seen a picture of himself before.
That's right.
And he's only got $1.75 in his account, and so he's willing to give more than half of everything he's got in order to get as many photographs as he can get his hands on. And why do you think that's so important to him? What is?
Oh, I just feel I feel that when I read this, I could feel the jubilation. And finally, he sees himself as somebody. That photograph represents that he's okay, and he has to be okay. I mean, to stay in solitary confinement for 14 years,
Mm-hmm.
and this kid's a teenager, and he turns that hatred, not the hatred, but the adverse situation into an academic training ground for himself, because he really is smart. He's smart,
very well read.
Very well read, and to have nothing to go on and to move to this spot, well, that is high self-esteem. He's at the top of the hierarchy now. And he is somebody, and look at him. And so I could just feel the smiles and the glows and the desire. And so sad, $1. He has $1.75. And we know that Attorney Stevenson certainly delivered those pictures. It goes without saying. Yeah, that did happen. But his journey, he's able to look at himself now in the reality that he's a child of God, and he has taken what the Lord has given him to develop himself. He must have known God was with him, because he didn't sit in pity. He got himself together, mm-hmm. and he came through. And that's what our Savior requires of us. In any situation, he's with us. And so it's time to celebrate. Now, do I sound preachy?
Well, appropriately so.
No,
I think, when you identify him as one of God's children.
Yes.
We learn in Genesis, we are all created in God's image. And so it's so important that we recognize that and we celebrate that. And so, yeah, I really think those pictures, maybe the first time he looks at himself and he sees himself as a human being, as a child of God.
Yeah.
Years and years ago, I went up to Harlem one Saturday, and I went up there to watch Jesse Jackson. He was running for president, and he was going to give a speech. And I thought, well, I want to see this. So we went up to Adam Clayton Powell Boulevard, and there was some big public building up there. I can't remember. There must have been 50,000 people gathered in that square. And you may remember Jesse Jackson's speech. He always started off with, "I am somebody."
That's right.
And then it would be sort of a call and response.
Yes.
And he would say, "I am," and the crowd would respond, "Somebody." And it would go on for several minutes. And I'll never forget 50,000 people chanting back, "I am somebody." And it was, I think it was so affirming for that crowd to see a Black man running for president.
Yeah.
And I think that was just, I grew up, I saw a lot of white men run for president. it was not something I ever really thought about, but it was so meaningful and so, maybe novel is not exactly the right word, but it was hugely significant for that community. And I think that was a moment where that crowd began to understand what Ian understands when he sees those pictures, that I'm a child of God. I'm created in God's image. I'm holy. I'm special. I am somebody because God created me.
And that's been a hard message, teachable moment, because of the way we were brought here 400 years ago, because of the way we have been treated. Many of us don't have good self-concept. And I keep telling people you can't go to church and not have good self-concept. But Jesse Jackson's I Am Somebody was so very meaningful during that time, because we have not been allowed to be involved in most of the institutions and opportunities this country has provided. Mm-hmm. And I remember so very much, I have my Black Lives Matter on when I got back from the convention in 2015, and we had a meeting, the bishop was there, and they mentioned that Black Lives Matter. And this came from the delegation from St. Louis, Missouri. And someone in our church wanted to know that all lives matter. And I really want to speak up to say, it's more for us than you. We have to indoctrinate ourselves. We have had to indoctrinate ourselves to say, we're all right. There's nothing wrong with us. And see, that's what Ian learned. He's all right. He's brilliant. I mean, in spite of, he was masterful, but so much goes lacking in our communities in the way of real self-concept, of believing in ourselves, that we're not dumb, or we're not ignorant, or we just don't dance. All of us can't sing, as may believe. All of us don't have rhythm. Givens, if you could have met him, he had no rhythm, none. So
well, it's interesting. You kind of have started preaching now, and I think what I've never really thought of that. Black Lives Matter. I've always thought that as sort of an outward statement. I never really thought about it as the Black community talking to itself.
It is, because years ago during the movement, James Brown created a song, I'm Black and I'm Proud, say it loud, I'm Black and I'm proud. And so this is just a carryover from that. We have to be convinced ourselves that we're okay. And James Brown lost a lot when he made that song back in the, I don't know what, 60s or 70s. He was my favorite, but it was during the civil rights era that he did that. He wrote that song to say it loud, I'm Black and I'm proud, I am somebody. I am
got a great
so-and-so.
Sorry, Ms. Norma. We've got a great chat over here that's kind of talking about exactly what y'all are talking about in the Facebook chat. It seems like this chapter 8, seems to have been one that hit a lot of people in some different ways. And so, Kelly has said that these words, kind of have these pictures point to that he exists in some real way. And I think, I would echo that. I thought that he was here. And so these pictures are evidence that people in jail, we don't think about them, and we don't think that they matter. And so here's an example of someone, Bryan Stevenson, who says, no, you as a person matter, you as an individual are important, and you are here on this earth. And so here's evidence of that. And so there's some good chat going on about that significance. I think that people matter. And if you're not told that you matter or that you're important, then it's easy to think that you don't.
It's interesting, I've never wondered, I've never wondered whether white lives matter.
Yeah.
I never wondered whether my life mattered. I mean, I just, again, from my perspective as a white male, educated, relatively affluent when you compare it to the world's population,
Mhm.
that's never been a question for me. I've never had to have anybody affirm that. It's just been assumed and understood.
Yeah, and that's the outcry today, especially with young Black males. The real fear that something could happen to their lives. They could be stopped for no reason, and it's just too much evidence. And you'd be surprised to know, and of course, women also, but people are real concerned about their boys now, and trying to tell them what to do in case they are stopped by the police. Do this, do that. Do not try to make them angry because their lives matter. They want to live also, and so it is not just, it carries over into today's world.
Yeah.
And that self-assurance is needed for each of us, for all of us. It's not just enough to think it, but we have to practice that. Yeah.
Well, we've only got a few more minutes, and
Okay.
I want us to get to the question.
Miss Williams.
Miss Williams.
Yes.
This is during the trial. I'm on page 181.
Right.
That's where it begins, although I don't see where I've underlined it, so I may be on the wrong page.
In a moment, I felt some peculiar recognition. She had a little accident.
Yeah.
Page 181 is what's on our study guide.
Yeah, I just don't see where I'm. Oh, here it is. Yeah, there it is. Okay, so Ms. Williams is an elderly Black woman who wants to attend the trial, and she tries to get in the first day, and there's a police dog, and she was one of the marchers on the Edmund Pettus Bridge, terrified of dogs ever since, and so she doesn't go into the courtroom that first day. She feels terrible about that. She goes in the second day, and she keeps telling herself, "I'm not afraid of the dog, not afraid of no dog." She gets in there, she finds her place. Judge comes in, and everybody sits down except for Ms. Williams. She's still standing. And so I'm going to read this little paragraph, and then I want to ask you a question, Norma. It says, "The courtroom was packed, and the bailiff brought the court to order as the judge walked in. Everyone rose, as is the custom. When the judge took the bench and sat down, everyone else in the courtroom sat down as well. There was an unusually long pause as we all waited for the judge to say something. I noticed people staring at something behind me, and that's when I turned around and saw that Ms. Williams was still standing. The courtroom got very quiet. All eyes were on her. I tried to gesture to her that she should sit down, but then she leaned her head back and shouted, 'I'm here.' People chuckled nervously as she took her seat. But when she looked at me, I saw tears in her eyes."
Yeah.
And I wondered, Norma, what are those tears about? And then I asked you, we were talking a little bit earlier today. So what are the tears about? And do you know a Ms. Williams? Have you met a Ms. Williams?
Yes, but her tears are tears of joy. The dogs happened to have been the block for her. It was fear. And despite the dogs and not being able to be there the first day, she's able to get in the next time. And so that's her relief, because she's a dedicated Christian lady, a soldier, a pillar in her community, as most African American women are. And all of us growing up, I had a Mrs. Williams in my life. And I was teasing you today, and in a real sense, I'm trying to be Mrs. Williams in my community to shed light on some things politically, socially, and to provide a little impotence and support for the young people in my community. I went to City Hall last night and said, look, you guys have just bought this large golf course, then we should have a first tee program that will introduce golfing to these kids, to African-American kids, Latino, any I don't want to sound underprivileged, but a kid that may not have the opportunity, they can be a part of First Tee. And it's a great program. There's a young man on the news the other night who's a page in the Senate of the United States, and he came through First Tee. He wants to be a judge. So that's an advocate for. And remember, Doug Jones in your state of Mississippi, he's in because of the Mrs. Williams. The Black women, 96% of them voted for him. So this caricature is live and well and real in our community. And when Black men usually could not speak or be the aggressor, we have been. We carried the torch and provided a lot of wisdom, finance. Many folk who taught schools, you'd be surprised to know they would even close some of their those children, take them home, expose them, take them on trips. Whatever we could do or we can do to aid the furtherance of the young people in our community, that gets to be the task. And so she is really a civil rights worker. And see, when my mother was living in her heyday as an independent businesswoman, she could be involved in the movement. My neighbors who were school teachers could not, because they worked for Greenville County Public Schools and you would lose your jobs. Now they would provide money and food, they would do what they could, but they could not be in the forefront of any movement. And so my mother with her friends got together, and the first African-American city councilman for Greer was our neighbor. And she was so happy for his election, and he did a fantastic job. She would attend every city council meeting. And so Mr. Gilmore found a new place, he's an undertaker, and moved across town. She was so distraught because that meant we didn't have representation. So I'm in Georgia and I get a call and she said, listen, this is what I'm going to do. I told Gilmore he could use our address so he could stay on city council. I said, you going to jail and Gilmore is going to jail. They don't know. So I'm saying that to say these women have done everything in their powers and do and still do. And there are a lot of folk around in our community doing that. But she has a great legacy, having marched in the Selma activity through now. She's relentless.
Well, I certainly think those tears are tears of victory and triumph, and a real quiet dignity. And
yes.
I think that's what that's about. And I think she's hugely important in the community. And
we seem to agree in the chat that she's some form of a witness, and that witnesses are important. And Norma Kelly, I know we're almost out of time, but we have a question about, I think Norma, you've spoken about that it was difficult for a lot of men to carry the torch and to maybe be outspoken. Is that because it was dangerous, or is that for some other reason? Can you shed some light on that?
Well, it's dangerous, certainly, but then in our community, usually families would make sure their daughters are educated and not the men. And so they were limited in their knowledge and in their exposure. Now, when I was thinking about my graduation my class, my high school class, the majority of us who went to college were female. Out of my high school graduating class in 1964, I don't think I can count 5 young men who went to college from my graduating class. Yeah. So the opportunities have not been there, and women and men, when you start looking, they will not be accepted in the wider society. A white man is not going to listen to a Black man telling or being engaged. Look at what corporate America is now. I mean, how many Black men do you know had any corporation? We can't count 10 today in America unless you started yours. So the Black male has not been promoted or has not been given the opportunity to. It's only in the pulpit that they have had some type of leadership.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, Norma, I want to thank you for being a Ms. Williams, and I certainly think you are in our community, and I think being part of this class is certainly, I think, evidence of that. So we all thank you, I'm sure. So
thank you very much. I am most honored, and I hope I can be of some assistance. And thank you for this opportunity.
It's we're a little late. I'm going to go ahead and close us with a prayer. So like you, Norma, this is out of the prayer book. It's on page 833. It's a prayer that'll be familiar to just about everybody. It's a prayer attributed to St. Francis. So let us pray. Lord, make us instruments of your peace. Where there is hatred, let us sow love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is discord, union. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is darkness, light. Where there is sadness, joy. Grant that we may not so much seek to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understand, to be loved as to love. For it is in giving that we receive, it is in pardoning that we are pardoned, and it is in dying that we are born to eternal life. Amen.
Thank you. And I'm so happy to have heard from some of you during the week too, and to know that you are present and have an interest. We thank you for your involvement. It means a lot.
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
I hope everybody has a great night, and we'll pick up again next week, starting at chapter 10. Y'all have a good night.
Good night.
Take care.